Yes. So I hope there is no question. So we'll move with the Suyog's presentation. Welcome, Suyog. Let me introduce Suyog first. Yeah, it's and it's really very much pleasure to introduce Suyog. At present, Suyog is working as a content designer with IBM Ahmedabad. During his 15 years of experience, he has previously worked with multiple companies like Autodesk and Aviva and Notix Corporation. He has many feathers in his head other than technical writing. Yeah, I really mean it. Yeah, he has published two books, The Dogfight and The Lone Peacekeeper in 2021, and The Right Stride, A Conversation with Your Writing Self in 2017. His multiple articles and poems have appeared in national and international books, poetry anthologies, and magazines. On Quora, he has shared more than 400 answers. He has a website which has been live for the last 11 years, and he has over 1,000 followers. Welcome, Suyog. Over to you. And I hope I'm not missing anything from what is there in your head. Any feathers from your head. Suyog, are you there?
Thank you, Ruchi. Um, Wonderful description. I think you've not missed anything from that, but at the same time, you've sort of made me quite a humble person now once again, because I see that even though I've covered a lot, um, there's still miles and miles to go right now.
True. Life is never ending thing.
True, it's a journey, not a destination.
Yes, it's a journey.
Miles and miles to go. Robert Frost.
Robert Frost, yes. We draw a lot of comments, Chandrak. I see. First of all, wonderful presentation. I don't know how you did that, but and this might sound a little surprising for everybody here. We've never talked, Chandrak and I see, even though we see a lot of common points that we've been able to draw within our respective presentations. I think I will be able to draw some analogy from him also. But then, yes, with that wonderful introduction, let's get started. All right, can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yes.
Right. Awesome. So welcome everyone. Over the years as a technical communicator, I see double.
Suyog,
I hear double noise.
Suyog, sorry, it's just the green screen. I hope that's what you're sharing. Or any content is there?
Not.
No, it's not. Okay.
Can you see the presentation now?
So we see the green screen. Someone has got.
I think I faced a similar problem 3-4 days back as well. Puneet, I think it's kind of.
Yeah,
Let's go ahead with you sharing the screen.
I said, yeah. Maybe you need to
I'll
share
share.
the.
Yeah.
Yes, Puneet, shall I share?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, is it visible?
Yes.
It's coming up.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. To me, it's not
Now
visible
it is
on the
visible.
screen.
Let's
It's very
go.
strange.
Let's go with hunch then, shall we?
Oh, you sure?
But I see your screen.
Okay. Okay.
And for familiarity's sake, I think I'll switch on the camera, although I'm not very camera friendly. Can you guys see me?
Yes.
Yes.
This helps, even if
It
you are
does,
not
it does.
camera friendly.
It does. Some ugly background. All right. Let's go with that. Just give me a moment, please. This is better, I guess. All right, so welcome everyone. What was I saying? Yes. Over the years as a technical communicator, I have understood that while it is still relatively easy for all of us to express ourselves, given that we are all in the business of communication, um, it is not easy for our seekers to understand our intentions. Even after we have a bouquet of workable ways, such as that of online and offline help, videos, PDFs, and walkthroughs, or even chat, we are still relatively unsuccessful at getting understood correctly, right? And I purposely say seeker because the seeker can be it can be our customer, our consumer, our reader, our own teammate from the sales and support side, our competitor. And as Chandrak said, the people who buy our product are not always going to be the people who are going to use it on a day in and day out basis. Of course, I paraphrase, but the idea is to not think of our users as just our users. It can be anybody. So then through this session, we will understand, uh, uh, or we will try to understand how we can tell through stories through technical communication, or and in a way how we can get ourselves understood correctly. Next slide, please.
Is it visible? Go on to the
Yes,
next slide.
yes.
Yes.
It's a pretty simple agenda. For me, we are going to try to find out answers to these 4 questions. Um, so then let's begin with the answer to the first question. But as I do that, um, let me first share a story with you. All right. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the story is about Lux. I'm sure you've all heard of this brand. It's an everyday brand for all of us right now. And the story is very interesting. Interesting because there's a bit of learning for all of us. And there are a lot of insights also that we can draw from the story. Next slide, please. As you all are aware, Lux as a brand of soap started off in the late 18th century, early 19th century. It's an international brand. It started off as a soap brand. We've seen a lot of changes, but overall, the key takeaways have been reinvention and relevance. Let's go to the next slide, please. You see the Lux brand life cycle there. Now hold on to the screen for a moment, please, Ruchi. During the early years of the soap brand, the communication was fairly elementary and functional. All right. So although it was a beauty soap, it did showcase connection with the fashion industry to begin with. And I'm talking about the early 1920s here. You can see the advertisement where she says at 39, she just laughs at her birthdays because she thinks she's beautiful on the inside. And Lux helps her feel beautiful on the outside. And this brand communication continued to be there, to be elementary and functional until the 1940s. Can you click once, Ruchi? One more. This is another such example. This is interesting now. Toward the beginning of the 1940s, specifically during the Second World War, you see the poster of Marilyn here. The brand personified itself by associating it with the German American actress. And now I want you to look at this advertisement carefully. She stood in support of USA against Germany. And I say that because she is an German American actress, right? She even donated her earnings for one feature film close to about $450,000 and I'm saying back then $450,000 in support of the refugee camps and restoration of the lives of those who were affected during the war. So then imagine Lux also associated itself, sort of personified itself in this person during the 1940s. So then you see the brand communication changed a little bit from elementary and functional to something which is more of extending its boundaries, right? Can you tap once more? We look at the era where the Lux brand life cycle, if you see on the left, it moved from the stage of innovation into the stage of maturity. So then the brand started introducing itself into other countries. We see the brand being introduced in India and Nigeria and Africa, a larger part of Africa, for example. You see people from all walks of life and people from all shades of colors began to associate themselves with the brand. Um, what you see right now here on the screen is, I think, Faithia Williams, who is a Nigerian actress, and Lux uh, chose her face as the model to personify itself. Um, this brand communication continued to evolve, and the brand continued to move closer and closer to its core philosophy of associating itself with beauty and fashion industry, which is why toward the end of 1990s, Ruchi, I want you to tap once again. The brand began associating itself with more and more beautiful people. Okay, but then in came the early 2000s, I believe, sometime around that. There was stiff competition in the market, and it kind of didn't really help much, all right, for the brand to associate itself with beautiful people any longer. So then what it did is it changed the brand philosophy. And you see the Lux brand life cycle, the stage rebirth began, uh, where the brand wanted to push itself into the market. And that is why you would see advertisements or where Lux came up with this new scheme of finding if you were lucky enough, you would find a gold pendant in the soap. I'm sure a lot of you remember that advertisement. And then there was also this new innovation by Lux where it came up with real gold petals in the market. And then something that I've been waiting for to discuss in this presentation. Ruchi, tap once again, please. Lux even signed up SRK for this bold advertisement. Next slide, please. So this little story of
Suyog froze.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, I guess.
Suyog, you there?
Looks like a network issue.
Yeah. Suyog? Maybe Ruchi, you can ask him to drop
Yeah, give
and
us a
rejoin.
moment. Give us a moment. He's trying to connect back.
Yes, talk to Suyog. He has some problem with internet. He's connecting again. Please bear with us.
So what an irony. We all are into technical documentation. We rely so much on technology and still it's not reliable.
So true.
Technology is never reliable. It's only the humans who are more reliable.
Are they?
At least more than ChatGPT.
True,
We
true.
need a social discussion on that topic now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Suyog is back. Suyog, you're back. Can't hear you.
He's still joining, I suppose. I can't. So continuing with our chit chat by the time Suyog joins. And, Wi-Fi is the most unreliable technology. It will always ditch you when you are in something very important. How many of you agree with this?
Yeah, I completely agree. It happens when
Yes,
you
I
are
do.
in a very important meeting.
You are in the most important of the meetings, and probably if you are saying something or listening to something really important that time. And sometimes when you don't want to attend the team meetings, which are really boring or all hands, it will never ditch you.
Yeah, it has always happened with me that whenever I'm mailing something important, I have done everything. I have attached the document, I have written the draft of the mail, just left to click the send button and the Wi-Fi goes. It happens with me every time.
True. Somehow I think it also understands that, oh, you are dependent on me, you are doing something important. I'll
Yeah.
show my attitude. AI
Yeah.
at its best, probably.
So by the way, people attending this session, how many of you have used storytelling so far in your journey in documentation field? Have you used it? I'm sure you must have heard the word and all.
So the point that Suyog is making is really interesting. Every document that you write has to have an inherent story. When you are writing a white paper, of course, you need a story, but whether you are writing a case study, whether you are writing a comparison, a guide, a how-to, every single thing should have a story, and a story will have a starting, middle, and end. So if you are not a storyteller, you will never be comfortable writing.
Absolutely.
Right. So
I
Gayatri
think
has
we,
raised her hand.
I think we did do. Sorry, Gayatri, go ahead. This is
So
Deepa
go
speaking.
ahead. Go ahead, Shubhati, complete it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've always wanted to learn the art of telling stories in technical communication, and I've not been pretty successful in that because, especially when it comes to storytelling, how do you do that in highly technical products? Especially in the overviews or in the conceptual information, where I see the potential of helping the users understand the concept using storytelling. Uh, but so far I've never been successful in that. But I do have seen examples where it's being used. So I'm very
I'm back.
curious to know more from Suyog about this. Yes.
Suyog, you're back?
Yes. Sorry for this
Okay.
delay, unexpected.
Welcome back,
So
Suyog.
that was
Go.
Thank you.
that was a big storm, big network storm. Okay, you can go ahead.
Looks like.
Gayatri and Deepa, we will come back to you. Thank you.
Yeah.
But all
Okay.
the questions, both of you. I did get the gist of what you're saying. Hopefully, the presentation will be able to answer a lot of questions for you.
Thank you.
I'll say for you and all of us, including me. Right, so where were we? Yes, so this little story of reinvention and relevance, it comes with a surprise, The surprise that the birth of this brand was actually the rebirth of it. And I say rebirth because if you go to Google and type Lux as a brand, you will realize that it was first introduced as a mild garment washer. It wasn't even a beauty soap, right? And which is why stories are effective, because of a lot of things that we can derive from stories. Surprise is one of the biggest contributing factors. But then if we keep that aside, I think all of us will agree that we find stories relatable. We respond based on what we learn from the stories, and we find those relevant to all of us. And I say relevant because it is one of the most important points that I have come across. I'll tell you why. Can you go to the next slide, please, Ruchi? So based on whatever I understood, I broke this down into 3, 4 things. And I see that there are layers to relevance. And you remember, right, we are talking about seekers. We are not only talking about users or customers or consumers or partners or people from within our organization. This relevance acts at 4 different layers. There isn't any specific order in which you will see those layers of relevance acting. But in a lot of cases, I've observed that it follows this order of critical relevance, then strategic relevance, then contextual relevance, and then emotional relevance. We will discuss more on this as we go ahead. For now, let's look at the second question. This is done something to my flow of thought now. I'll take probably a couple of moments to come back. But the idea is with that one single example, you will see that how stories impact us. They act as our ambassadors by helping us carry our messages across rather safely and confidently in ways that sometimes we as technical communicators struggle. And then you can pick any brand, you can pick any situation. If you look at that from a case study point of view and try to connect the dots for yourself, you will see that there are life lessons that you can deduce, relate to, learn, and apply. But then the question is, should we always use stories, or is there anything that we should be wary of? Which is why this is the second question I want to address. Next slide, please, Ruchi. So it appears that we have a long list of things that we should avoid. Audience decoration mismatch. I'm sure that you too have come across situations where the developers give you too much information. It's either too technical or a little too much.
Yeah,
right? And the funny part is that the development teams think that they are better writers because what they give you is technically accurate. But then for a moment, if you go back to that emotional relevance quotient, you will see that the seekers, they don't care if that information is technically accurate, but they would most certainly care if they are able to complete what they want to do based on your content. So then it is up to you to decide how much information is just too much, right? As technical communicators, that probably is our most underrated superpower, because we know how much is too much, because we know what information should go to what kind of user, based on user roles, we can divide that information such that if the information becomes too technical or is too technical in nature, we know that it is meant to be consumed by customer administrators or those from our end who are going to install or configure or get that software going at the user's end, right? And then there's another aspect to the same point, which is like an extension to this audience decoration mismatches of that of distracting decoration. When we overdo a certain things. In one of my previous stints, when I remember when we took over this content from a certain team for documentation work, I noticed that we were told to work on upgrade guide, and it contained a whole paragraph of how delighted that company was on finding that you had started using that product. So then it was an upgrade guide, and it started off with, welcome, we are glad to see that you have started. It ran something like this. It was distracting. I couldn't believe that it had missed the eyes of technical writers. But then whatever the reason was, we removed that paragraph, we updated the content. The thing is, we don't please our readers, right? We know that they have done their homework to have chosen our products. So then we keep the formalities aside to concentrate on the more important stuff, right? Now I'll go back to that question of stories. All right. Until now, we all agree that we see that stories have a lasting impression. But then can and should we implement stories everywhere? I think that was one of the questions that one of you had put it, right? We cannot. I'm sure that the story format will mislead our seekers if and when we implement story format for example, hardware and software requirements or concepts or installation or upgrade or wherever we have stepped instructions or troubleshooting information. But then on the flip side of it, we can and probably should implement story format when it comes to writing how-tos or scripting videos. In our current organization, we have a practice that if we look at stepped procedure, we modify it to sound like somebody is conversing with you. It has to sound conversational whenever you are scripting videos. Okay. And then when you're creating procedure-driven FAQs or introducing something, you can use story format. It's like if you look at it closely enough, you'll realize that when we are creating epics and feature requests for ourselves in our work tracking tools like Jira or GitHub, we use our storytelling skills, right? We break things down into chunks where we sort of move everything from point A to point B. We sort of interconnect, right? And that is something we can do with our documentation also. If we have our documents, we can insert link to videos, or if we have videos, we can insert link to walkthroughs and back to our documentation. We can interlink in the slides. Some of the slides that you will see, you will see the word ecosystem. Okay, and that is an important word because all that insufficient references and links, we can get rid of it if we are able to interconnect our content. And then the last point about objectives. Our initial drafts, and I'll go back to the first point here. Our initial drafts are often tinted with information or impact from what the developers have given us. Okay, and believe me, I've gone on to quote this in my book also. I remember that how much ever you underpin cognitive learning theories in technical communication, the users will invariably learn more when they are unknowingly involved in the learning process. Okay, basically what it means is the users learn more when they are not learning. To create an impact, we should focus on experimentation and empowerment. So what I want to say here is learning is a byproduct. Okay, if we continue to translate whatever quote unquote technically accurate information our developers give us into our content, I'm sure the user will successfully lose us. They won't remember a thing. Okay, and all these points, if we are able to consider and avoid in our documentation, I think our documentation will be impactful. But then let's look at how do we create impact, right? And that's the third question I'm going to answer for you. Ruchi, can you please go to the next slide? So what do I do to create an impact? Okay. Now, this is an interesting question also, because in a way we answer that question for all of us. If I were to ask that question to all of you, you would probably begin with something like, let us understand what is the need of the hour, right? Let us understand what is the need of the user, right? It's a cliched term. Okay, Ruchi, can you please go to the next slide? Now I say cliched because I find that this is a cyclical process, because the user's needs are often based on and subject to their situations, which in turn are subject to their choices and decisions, right? And their choices and decisions are based on their needs. So how do you solve this conundrum? How do you do that? You do that by asking the right questions. And I say asking the right questions, I don't mean only to the users. You can ask questions. There are a lot of ways in which you can get answers from them. User research, for example, is one way in which you can find out answers to such questions. But then you can always talk to your product owners, project managers, developers, and testers, and people from the support and services, those who've sort of installed and configured the product on for on-premise installation, of course. The point is that we have to come up with ways in which we can understand the right context for the user, to understand what matters to them, right? For what matters to our seekers. And even though understanding needs lies at the core, it is not the only thing that matters, right? You understand the need, but then are there any other things to it? Yes, there are. Ruchi, next slide, please. So what are those, right? These are the techniques that I use, and these are the techniques I have seen a lot of people, a lot of companies use. I use, for example, if I give you a piece of paper or a web page which contains run online text from cover to cover, the first from the very place it starts to the very place it concludes, the page only contains run online text. Versus if I give you a page which contains a proper heading, the content which is divided into sections and subsections, some graphical representation of what we are talking about, proper headings, and then hyperlinks. Which of the two content would you prefer? Most probably the content which is properly designed, right? In one of my previous organizations, we would circulate PDFs for our content, and we were finding a lot of people were getting back to us with questions on how to use these things. So then we created a new section, a new heading called scenarios within our documentation. And in those scenarios, we included questions, and each of those questions would begin with how do I? Okay. And what each of those topics did is we interlinked content from within the entire documentation. So for example, how do I remember Chandra used this example of iPhones, and I'm going to do the same so that we are able to create a consistent analogy here. Chandra, if I may. So for example, you can have a question like, how do I get rid of duplicate contacts on an iPhone? That becomes a use case, that becomes a scenario. And then you will obviously have content that relates to this topic within your documentation. So then you form that question, you create a story based on it. The story doesn't have to be, Mr. X is facing a problem with this phone. They don't know how to merge duplicate contacts. You don't have to do that. Your story has to necessarily move from point A to point B, where point A is a problem and point B is the resolution for it. And then what it does, it creates a flow of information. Okay. And I remember we received a lot of appreciation emails for what we did in that guide, and it reduced the number of support tickets as well. So obviously, because customers save costs. That is one way of retaining them for sure. And then I'll say one of the simplest ways in which you can implement storytelling in technical communication is to use this my trusted PREC model, PREC. It stands for P stands for point, R for rationale. Go back to the slide, previous slide, please. Next, the previous. Yeah, this one. Yeah. So P, where are we? Ruchi, next slide, please. Right. So P stands for point, R for rationale, E for example, and C for conclusion. Now I want to volunteer here. Puneet, I see your name there. If you have any questions for the session, please type it here. So Puneet, can you, for example, let's pick this scenario, iPhones versus Android. If I say which one of the two is better, what would you say?
I think I would say iPhone is much better because apart from multiple other features and being one of the most popular one, it's much more secure considered to be than Android. That would be one reason.
Awesome. Excellent answer. All right. I would say something like iPhones are better, which here in this acronym here is my point. My rationale is that its hardware and software are closely coupled. So you see an improvement in the performance. For example, I've never had an iPhone that has ever stuck. I've never had to restart it. All my apps work correctly, the way they should, which is why I say that iPhones are better. Now, if you look at it closely, what we've done, both of us, and I say that because we do that on a subconscious, at the subconscious level, we do that without registering that we are doing it. We move people's understanding from one point to another, where we first state the point, then we give the logic for it, then we give an example, and then we conclude our understanding, right? So you might argue that simply stating the logic is more a more succinct form of communication, which I agree. But this PREC model helps you empower. What it does is it transfers your intentions to your words, and then it helps the seekers transform the words back into the logic, the way in which they want to understand that message. Even that attempt from them is enough for you to get your message across effectively. This model is quite easily one of the simplest methods, like I said, of implementing stories in technical communication. But then, of course, that's not a complete list. You can have your own method, right, of empowering the seekers. There is also this model in which I look at graduating their understanding, which I like to call map your way. Ruchi, next slide, please. Now, for the purpose of this presentation, what I've done is I've mapped each of these steps with the brand life cycle, the Lux brand life cycle, if you remember. All right. You can call it information life cycle, but the stages will still remain the same. You can see how we have always used this technique without us registering to do so. We've all journeyed along from merely sort of completing tasks, collecting facts, stating facts, to creating stepped procedures to help the seekers complete their tasks, and then to curating those tasks or connecting those tasks with usability, and then eventually reducing their cognitive load and making things more intuitive for them, right? I remember Chandra said this in his presentation about unified messaging. You'll see the word ecosystem there, right? It means that different teams from within our organization say the same thing in the same way. Doesn't matter whether the communication is coming from marketing or whether it is coming from technical communication. Now, if you look at it, both these departments, if you like to call them, they lie at the farthest ends of this spectrum of communication. One focuses on luring people to buy your product, whereas one focuses on uh, helping them make sure that they've made the right decision. Because if they can't find the right information, they'll think that whatever they've bought is crap, right? um, uh, and if you look at this model from one perspective, you'll realize that all these layers of relevance, no, they apply to all these layers of information mapping from facts to knowledge as it is. And like I said before, there's no specific order in which you should apply these layers of relevance. Yet, for some reason, and I don't know what that reason is, all these layers of relevance, no, they apply in the same order itself. So when we discuss facts, we are talking about critical relevance. When we are talking about data, for example, we are talking about strategic relevance. Sometimes people might confuse the two, but then there's a difference between um, facts and data also, right? For example, if you say um, jogging in morning is good for health is a fact, right? But if I say something like 70% of those who go for a morning walk have a better health in comparison to those who do not. So then I immediately what I do is I connect that with some figure that I can verify, and that fact can be transformed into data. You can do similar things with data to transform it into information, and then you can do similar things with information to transform that into knowledge. All that sort of creates a journey where the user goes from point A to point B. You just help them along in this journey, right? So that is a way in which you can create stories. It doesn't have to have a hero or a protagonist or an antagonist or a suspense or a midpoint where the hero is all broken down and then they find a way to get back up. Stories are not always about that, right? Let us look at the last question now. We know what stories are, we know how effective they can be. But how do I practice storytelling, right? For this, to answer this question now, I have done two things. The first thing is to assimilate all the knowledge, all the points that we've discussed so far in a model. And I've made that model easy for you to remember. Ruchi, can you please go to the next slide? What I've done is I've deduced a model where all you need to do is just remember these R's. All right. And because I'm toward the end of my presentation, I specifically want to say this, although that is not in the scope of our today's session. I want to highlight that the stories that work by creating a fictional world around you are created with a completely different intent. Okay. Therefore, do not expect your stories in technical communication to look like the stories from a fictional world. Your stories have to be functional in nature. If you expect to create a hook by keeping the readers in suspense, believe me, the hook won't work, right? If you expect the stories to be built to be built up to the user, where you sort of move in an inverted pyramid approach, where you set the context, give a lot of background or a backstory, the user will be all lost, right? So even though a lot of elements from storytelling will work in technical communication, there will still be a great many differences, right, in terms of how stories work in the fictional world versus the functional world. Okay. The other thing that I want to share with you is an Excel worksheet. The worksheet, Puneet will, when we are sharing the slides for this presentation, Puneet will also share the worksheet with you. For the time that remains now, Puneet, how much time do we have? I'm sure I've wasted a lot of time already in all the goof up that happened. But I think we can still have a look at the Excel worksheet.
Yeah, we have. So anyway, as per the schedule, we are already 6 minutes ahead. But yeah, considering all that, let's get give it 10 minutes max, including Q&A. Is that fine?
Should be fine. Yes, 5 minutes I think is more than sufficient.
Okay, so sharing that link.
Okay.
Here in the chat.
Ruchi, can you open that Excel worksheet?
Yes, I can. Give me a second.
All right.
Yeah, so you can directly open that which I've shared with you, so it will be visible to all. You might need to change the screen setting for sharing.
Yeah. Give me a second.
And
Is it
for
visible?
the participants,
Awesome.
it's coming
This
up.
is not the worksheet that I gave.
Oh,
So
give me a
please
second.
close that.
Oh, Puneet, I have received this only. Please share.
Puneet, if you can share your screen.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Just 1 minute, Suyog, I need to download. I think there is a wrong file downloaded. So I'm just downloading.
Okay. So all I need is just a couple of minutes.
In the meanwhile, if you have a question, you can just go ahead and ask the question. So far. If you have. Okay, I got it. Just sharing.
Awesome. It looks like we do not have any questions. So either I'm super awesome at presenting things, or it's just that we probably have a...
The storytelling was too good. Okay, is this visible?
This is the one, yes.
Okay.
Can you zoom out a little bit?
Interesting. On my own screen, I cannot see. 1 second. Does this help?
On the bottom right, you will see the zoom level set to 140%. And we set it to 100%. But then this is still sufficient. You can please keep that open. So what I want to say is between the fictional and the functional calls, right? What I've done is, can you please go on mute?
Oh yeah, I'm just trying to find that button on the Excel. It's not visible.
Hello.
So I'm
In
not
Teams, hello, Puneet and Suyog. In Teams, we can zoom in on our own screen also.
Oh,
You
is
can
that
try
so?
that.
Is it better? But the interesting part is I don't see the sharing screen. This is, well, 1 second. Something is getting messy. I don't know what. Today we have a lot of tech. Now,
Yes.
I see that.
Yes, it is.
200%.
It is visible, yeah.
is it clear?
Yeah. All right, no problem. Let's go ahead with what we have right now. Puneet, can you please go on?
But the leftmost, the first column is not visible.
No problem. I think you will still be able to download the Excel worksheet and it should work perfectly for you.
Okay.
Puneet, can you please go on mute unless you speak because it's creating a lot of echo and we are not able to hear.
Yeah. I'm hearing my own voice, which is weird.
Yeah, now it's clear. Yes.
All right. So what I've done in this Excel sheet is that I've tried my level best to underpin the differences between both the fictional and the functional worlds. You will see a column for initial draft. You will see a column for 10 questions. There are hints for all those questions. And what you can do is rewrite your initial draft based on these answers to these questions to make the content more approachable to the user. Okay. The thing is, I agree that all of you are already champions at writing to communicate primarily, but I hope that this worksheet will help you become champions at rewriting to empower. Now, I believe our purpose, it should be a common one, as technical communicators, is to empower our seekers. All right, it is to lend them the power to make, to help them make informed, cognitive decisions. And it has to be a journey. It's not a one-time thing. It won't happen overnight. It never happened overnight for anybody else also, believe me. And each of our documents is just a step in the right direction. Forget about sentences or paragraphs also. Each of our documents is a step in that direction. We have to consciously, purposefully lead the seeker's way in this little journey of theirs. That's the idea. So that probably is where I will close this presentation and open up for questions.
Thank you, Suyog. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation. Let's have the question and answers session. Oh, I can see myself twice. Yeah, is there any question? Suyog, you explained it so well that we don't have any question.
Yes, no question, Suyog, but I love this Excel sheet. It is so good. You know, probably if we all can really have this as a checklist every time we start writing something, it's really good.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
I've often observed that we write better when we rewrite. And then somehow, it has become a habit for me that writing now is the second last step for me in the process of writing itself. What I do is probably a lot of homework before I get to sit down to write also. And that probably is from where this whole Excel sheet has come into picture. I've used it a lot of times myself.
Yes, absolutely. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Hi, Suyog. Hi, Chandrak. I'm Deepa. I'm Shubho Deepa, more known as Deepa by a lot of people here. I was listening. I have joined a TWT session after a long time because I was very curious, especially for Suyog's presentation, the topic he has chosen. And Chandrak, I really loved your presentation as well. So I don't have a question, but I want to just reiterate one thing. I was previously trying to answer Gayatri's question. So one thing Suyog pointed out was he said something about Jira, and there we have this concept of user story. So Gayatri had asked that, how do we implement stories in technical writing or in our documentation? So just correct me if I am wrong, Suyog. According to my understanding, even the storytelling and all the terms that we use today, even before that, by default, we were actually using storytelling in your documentation. Because when we think of the user and we think of the action that user is taking, when we write in the fundamental case of technical writing, we help the user to perform an action, right? And if you see Jira, it says user story. It uses the term story because it says as a user, as a layman, what you are going to do. And we look at that story, and then we draft our documentation. So by all people who are actually feel that, okay, how do I implement storytelling, how do I implement other things, all the complex terminologies that come into picture in today's world. You know what, we are already doing it. All you need to do is just think about it and align it. So
True.
this kind of presentations really help, because you understand, for me personally, Puneet knows that I have a lot of experience doing stuff, but I cannot pinpoint it. So these presentations help me to understand, oh wow, I have been doing storytelling. Oh wow, I had been doing this thing, So thank you so much again, and wonderful job with the Excel sheet. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Glad you liked it. I think Deepa, you've summarized it beautifully. Sometimes we just get bogged down by the process too much to lose focus on the user's uh, primary objectives. Um, it's akin to what Ruchi and we talked about in the beginning of our session. No? Life is a journey, not a destination. Similarly, even users' comprehension is a journey. It's not a destination. Every time user is able to accomplish something based on what we write, their primary objective changes from X to Y, and then it's a cyclical process.
Thanks for the kind words, Dipa. So what Suyog has done is really well. And this point of epic and stories, I think let us keep it at the end, because I think we'll complete Ravi's part, because I have got a point over here, which will once again come back to what Suyog has mentioned over here. So let us have that discussion after Ravi's session. But it's an important point about having epics and stories